There are many who will say the founders in America were Enlightenment figures, they were deists, they believed in a higher authority and a greater good.
Yeah.
But you'd say you need more than that. You actually needed to be grounded in the core beliefs of Christianity. In other words, you can't leave Christ out of it.
Right, you can't leave Christ out of it. But I'd go back to the first claim, because that's one of my favorite topics. When the people say the founders were deists, well, arguably a handful of them were. But at the Constitutional Convention, there were 55 men there. 50 of the 55 were Orthodox Christians. 50 of the 55 were Orthodox Christians. The people who were either deist, or I would say the American deists, were more like semi-deists, right? Jefferson would qualify, Ben Franklin would qualify, and then Thomas Paine was an infidel, but not really a founder. He was a popular author from the time. But
Hamilton's role, and the musicals everywhere.
Yeah.
But Hamilton's role is very important. He had he seemed to have strayed a bit in his personal walk in the middle of his life, came back to it at the end. But he had a brilliant insight into the tyranny of the mob capability of people, and that was profoundly Christian.
Yes.
And he was one of the main authors of the Federalist Party papers.
The
enormous influence.
Yes.
So everybody's going out to learn about Hamilton. He's worth closer study.
Yeah.
I would have thought.
Hamilton and Madison, Hamilton, Jay, the Federalist Papers were newspaper articles that were trying to get ratification of the Constitution through. And I think it's Federalist 53. Madison says basically, you must frame a constitution that restrains the people and simultaneously requires the government to restrain itself. And if men were angels, he said, we wouldn't need a constitution. And the thing that, if I were a Martian arriving here and I said, hey, let me look at your constitution, what can I conclude about the founders from the Constitution they wrote? My big takeaway is the Constitution they wrote has this one central takeaway: never, ever trust an American. They didn't trust anybody. They said, C.S. Lewis has a great line in this. Lewis said that there are two kinds of Democrats. There's a small d Democrat. There's the Democrat who believes that every person's opinion is so valuable that we can't do anything until we've checked with everybody. And he said, that's not the kind of Democrat I am. I believe that men are so fallen and so corrupt that we have to spread the power as thinly as possible, because we can't give too much power to any one person or entity. And that's the genius of the American
Absolutely.
Of the American Constitution,
and I have to say of the Australian Constitution.
Yeah, basically
it
that's
recognises that. Break the power up. Don't let anybody get too much of it. Don't let them hold it for too long.
That is built on the bedrock of the Christian doctrine of original sin. Right. When they formulated the
coupled with the dignity, I would have said.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, coupled with
that balance. Somebody I read, an American said, we are so good we had to give ourselves the vote. We're so bad we had to give ourselves the vote.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So when the Constitution was adopted, they weren't worried about the British coming over again. They all these checks and balances, the separation of powers, the two-layer federalism, the central government, and then all the state governments. And then at the national government, you had the legislative and the executive and the judicial. And then the legislative is broken up into two houses. It's a bicameral system. They're spreading the power as thinly as they can. And they're doing it not because the British might come over and become tyrannical again. They did all this because they knew that the Americans could become tyrannical again. And this is why this is one of my favorite pet peeve arguments. And some conservatives in recent last decade or so have wanted to emphasize American exceptionalism. And then they talk about American exceptionalism. But if you look at the history of empires, there was Babylonian exceptionalism, there was Persian exceptionalism, there was British exceptionalism. It's the easiest thing in the world for a superpower at the top of its game to say we're number one. But when the founders were looking at the prospect of becoming a great and prosperous nation, which they were very aware of was happening, Thomas Jefferson particularly, they were very aware that if we get to the Pacific, this is going to be a juggernaut, this is going to be a thing. At that moment, they said in the Constitution, we put our pants on one leg at a time like everybody else. We're fallen sinners like everybody else. We can't give anybody in the American government too much power. They recognized, the founders recognized that Americans were not exceptional at all.